I'm so glad to see you all, and also this team of folks from Mary's Dogs. I think this story will really resonate with you because a lot of the people I'm going to talk about tonight do the kind of work that they do. I want to tell you first how I sort of came to this story, because I was not a dog person at all. And for about 20 years, almost from the day we got married, my wife Judy and I had what I would call an extended discussion / argument about whether we could get a family dog. And then when our kids came along and they were old enough to talk, of course they got in on the act, and it was 3 against 1, and I really held my own for almost 20 years, and I kept them happy with hamsters and goldfish and a cockatiel named Houdini, who I didn't really get along very well with. And I was under a lot of pressure. My older son was already in college. My younger son was about to be a senior in high school before I finally relented and agreed to get a dog. And what happened was, my wife had conspired with some friends of ours who had a really wonderful black lab named Riley, that we would take care of Riley one weekend while our friends went away. I thought we were just doing them a favor. I didn't really realize I was being set up. But Riley was a great guest. He came with his own little bed. He was kind of like Alistair Cook, you remember from Masterpiece Theater? He was slightly aloof, but very, very sweet and very British in his bearing. And it would take him, we'd go out for a walk for about half an hour. We'd get to the neighbor's house in the back because he smelled absolutely everything. I've never seen a dog walk so slow in my life. But he was so mellow and he was so cute, and I finally relented. And I had a lot of good reasons, by the way, for not wanting a dog. I'm fairly fussy. I didn't want tumbleweeds of fur rolling through the house. My main objection, of course, was that despite the promises of my wife and my kids about who was going to walk this dog in February at 5 o'clock, I knew I was going to be the one at the other end of the leash skating across frozen roads in Massachusetts. So I came a long way to agree to get a dog. But I didn't have any idea how to go about getting a dog. And Judy and I went and visited a couple of breeders, and nothing really clicked. And then one day, she came home from a yoga class, and she said, this guy in my yoga class who said he adopted the most wonderful dog, and it's a rescue dog. I think we should get a rescue dog. And I wish there was a picture of my face at that moment, because I'm sure I drew a complete blank, because my image of a rescue dog was this. I swear to you, this is what I thought a rescue dog was, and as bad as the weather is in Needham, Massachusetts, I didn't think there was going to be a big calling for this kind of dog. Eventually, of course, what I learned was that rescue dogs, many of them, come from shelters like this. This happens to be in South Carolina, where a lot of Mary's dogs come from, just by coincidence. They also come from the streets, and we'll talk about why there are so many of these dogs, particularly in the South. But this is, you can see, pretty grim looking place. I mean, it's pretty Spartan, and it's, I have to tell you that the first part of this story is a bit heartbreaking. This is a tough story in many ways, but it's what makes the endings, when these dogs get united with their forever families, so joyous. So I'm going to sort of take you through that. But so we agreed, Judy and I said, okay, we're going to go the rescue route. And the fellow in my wife's yoga class had recommended Labs for Rescue, which is based in Connecticut. Like many organizations, they use petfinder.com, which many of you are probably familiar with. It's like the match.com of the pet world. And we started scrolling through the available dogs from Labs for Rescue, and we came across this picture of a dog named Albie. That was the name he came with, and he was in a shelter in central Louisiana, where 9 out of 10 dogs don't ever leave. The dogs that make it onto Greg's truck, I'm going to introduce you to Greg in a moment, the dogs that make it up here from the South have to beat incredible odds just to get on that transport and get on their way up here. Albie beat those odds in that shelter because there was a volunteer there who bought him time, 5 months, until they found an adopter, which turned out to be us. But so we saw this picture and we thought he looked really cute, and we scrolled down the page, and there was a video which I'm going to show you right now. It's about 30 seconds long. 3, 2,
boy. That's a sweet boy. You're so sweet. Come here. Come on. Good boy. Good boy. He's a sweetheart. Yes, you are.
That sealed the deal. I was in love. I was in love with this dog I had never met, and for all I knew, that was the best 30 seconds of his entire life. He could have been absolutely misbehaved, but we just fell in love. And I thought, being as naive as I was, because Labs for Rescue is based in Connecticut, that we would just go down the next day and pick him up in Connecticut, which is when I learned that he was still in a shelter in Louisiana. So we waited until there was room on the transport for him to come up. And when I heard the word transport from the adoption coordinator we were working with, Carrie Toth, down in Louisiana, and I'll introduce you to Carrie in a moment, I didn't even know what transport was. I knew it had something to do with him getting to us, but I really didn't have a picture of it. So in early July of 2012, while Albie was en route, we knew he was on the truck, one day Judy came running in, her laptop was open, and she said, "Look, it's Albie." Now, I had never met Greg Mahle, who you see in this picture. I didn't even know his name. And he documents, for reasons I'll tell you in a little bit, every one of his rescue road trips on Facebook. So we were able to follow Albie's journey north. And what got me interested in Greg was when I read what he wrote. I'm just going to read it to you. It's quite short, but this is what he wrote under this picture. He said, "The stress of everything got to be a little bit much, and I had to breathe. Albie suggested that we take a walk and try and relax me. And as we were walking, he told me how excited he was for me, and I told him how excited I was for him. And we hugged and we sat and we talked a while. And then he suggested we hop back in the truck and get the journey finished, because we both have our happily ever afters waiting for us at the end of the run. And we don't want to be late. We've just crossed the Mason-Dixon line and we're now in the north. And I hope you're as excited as we are. It won't be long. Get ready. The wait's almost over and we're almost home." And I was so taken with that, and I thought, this is not just some guy driving a truck. I mean, if you wanted to make a living as a truck driver, trust me, it would be far more lucrative and less stressful to drive bottled water or automobile parts. And I'm going to tell you more about Greg as we go. But in any event, so Albie came to us in early July of 2012. And, I think part of what binds us to these dogs, especially if they're older and that we know they have a history, because he was about 2 or 3 and was picked up as a stray, it's the mystery of their life before they came to us in some ways that binds us to them. So Albie came into our home, a little bit of an unguided missile, and he refused to come up the stairs. He spent the first 3 weeks sleeping under the coffee table in the living room. And we had all kinds of suppositions about why maybe he never lived in a house with stairs. We really didn't know, and you do tend to make a lot of assumptions. I'd come a long way to get a dog, but I had drawn one line in the sand, which was, we're not sleeping in bed with a dog. About 3 weeks after Albie was with us, I came upstairs one evening, and he had made what I call his literal and figurative leap of faith. And he was in bed, and I said to Judy, well, you can sleep in the guest room because he's staying. He looks he was so cute. And when I looked into those eyes in those early days, I had a lot of questions I would love to have asked Albie, and if he could have told me. I wanted to know if he'd ever had a family. I wanted to know if he had run away, if he had been cast off, how he had come to be wandering alone in central Louisiana, how he had survived. And most of all, I wanted to know, did anybody ever hurt you? No matter what deprivations these dogs have gone through before they come to us, it's our job to make it right for them. So in those early days, I was also taking Albie for a lot of walks, and as those of you with dogs know, it's a great way to meet people. And I was astonished at how many people I was meeting who had a dog from a southern state. Tennessee, Arkansas, Alabama, Louisiana. It seemed like everybody had a southern dog. So I started to wonder, why are there so many dogs from the southern states up here in New England? And we'll come to that in a moment. But I thought that there was one person who might be able to help me answer this question, and that was Greg Mahle, who had driven Albie up. And we had never met. in person, because in Massachusetts, our dogs coming in from out of state are supposed to go into quarantine for 48 hours. It's a complicated, controversial subject, but Albie went to a shelter for 48 hours before we could pick him up. So I emailed Greg Mahle, who didn't know me from Adam, to see if I could persuade him to let me ride along, because I'd gotten an assignment if I could persuade him to write a story about him for Parade magazine. So this is Greg's world, his home away from home, 2 weeks out of every month, every other week, every other Monday. He leaves home in Ohio to make a 4,500-mile drive in this truck. If you were driving a luxury sedan that far in 6 days, you would be exhausted. Driving a rig like this, even without dogs, is like being in an airplane that's always in moderate turbulence. It's physical, demanding driving, and on top of it, he's got 80 very, very lucky dogs going on their way home. And it's a tremendous responsibility. It's a lot of stress involved. He is never, that trailer and that truck is never left unattended. It's Greg and one other guy. And I was sort of entering this world as an outsider. So I knew I had to sort of prove myself to Greg. He's a kind of he can seem gruff at first, and I knew that I was just so afraid to ask him a stupid question, but that's all I had was stupid questions because I was trying to learn. So I flew down, when I was writing this story, to Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is his last stop. He'll be there tomorrow night, and spent the night, and then we did the drop-offs the next day. You see that little overhang in the front of the trailer? That's where Greg sleeps, on a mattress up there. I was squeezed in a sleeping bag between 2 rows of kennels on a hard floor. Not as comfortable as you might think. So that trip, over 4,000 miles every other week. Over 1 million miles in the last 10 years. So for them, it really is what I call the endless last hope highway. The article got a great response, and when it evolved into the book, at that point, Greg knew me and he trusted me. And I made the first of a few journeys with Greg, did the whole trip with him. But I started out in Zanesville, Ohio, where he lives with Adela and an ever-changing cast of dogs, some permanent, some fosters. But to give you an idea of the stress of this job, not just the driving, but he's got weather to contend with. This was Greg's previous truck in 2009, stuck for 3 days in a rest stop in Virginia in a blizzard with 40 dogs on board and 1 pair of sneakers for Greg. They had to, go out there with their feet to make paths so these dogs could get out and walk. So weather is a big stressor for Greg. I mean, it can be hurricanes, it can be high winds, it can be winter weather and heat. It's a 24/7 job when he's on the road. A lot of people think, okay, well, that's not so bad. When he comes home, he's got a whole week to kick back and watch TV. It's not like that. Just to get ready for the next trip and all the paperwork and the reservations and the maintenance, he's on top of the truck, he's under the truck. It's a 50 to 60-hour work week, even when he's not on the road. One of the jobs that has to be done, and he saved it for when I was there, that's me in the green shirt, the entire trailer has to be sanitized between every trip to help prevent possible spread of disease. So every kennel comes out, sanitized, the trailer's washed down, and so forth. It's an enormously demanding job, physically demanding, mentally demanding. But one of the things that Greg emphasized to me when we were on the road over and over again, he said, look, when we drop off the dogs, I'm the face of all this to the people who are picking up their dogs. But there were 100 people who had to play their part before that dog ever got to my truck, whose faces these folks will never see, whose names they may never even know. But it takes 100 people, he says, to save 1 dog. So there are all kinds of people along the way who have to play their part so that Greg can be that very last link in the chain. And one of them is the woman I mentioned earlier, Carrie Toth, who was our adoption coordinator for Albie. And like you have partners down south, Carrie works with the Central Louisiana Alliance for Animals, and they have partner rescues up north that they work with, including Labs for Rescue in Connecticut. Carrie's one of those people who does the really, really tough work life and death decision making, going to shelters and deciding which dogs they can take, which ones they have to say no to. These folks, I'm telling you, they sacrifice financially, they sacrifice in terms of family time. Whatever joy they get from each life they save, they are haunted by the hundreds that they see and the suffering that they see, the ones that they can't help. I went out with Carrie to several places like this. This is the equivalent of a town dump, but you know, this is how people in rural Louisiana discard their trash. There's no recycling, it's just a dumpster site. Stray dogs scavenge here, and I know there's a couple of young kids in the audience, but just to tell you that Carrie almost always finds litters of puppies alive, discarded in these dumpsters that she then pulls, gets to veterinarians for care, and tries to find homes for. It's pretty grim, and it takes, you know, these people, a lot of them, you know, familiar with the term, and this compassion fatigue. When I saw Carrie in Louisiana, she and her family were about to take their first ever family vacation together. The youngest of the 4 kids was 17, because she never could pull herself away long enough from this work. Carrie also took me, this is a very rudimentary pound in central Louisiana. If a dog survives here, it's going to end up in the Alexandria shelter where Albie was and face those 9 in 10 odds. And by the way, you know, a lot of these shelters, I mean, it's not they take any pleasure in this, in having to euthanize such a huge number of dogs. But every day there's another 100 dogs that are coming to their doorstep and they don't have room. But you can see here, there's not even any protection from the weather. It's absolutely filthy. It's not sanitized. There are 2 part-time deputies who are in charge of looking after it. It's pretty grim, and the stray dog population is out of control. One of the other people I spend time with, Carrie, by the way, I should have said, sends a lot of her dogs north with Greg. So does Tom English. Tom does his rescue work a little bit differently. Tom has adopted essentially this shelter in southeast Texas, near where he lives. And he goes there at least once a week to deliver food, to vaccinate dogs. He's not a veterinarian, but he gets the vaccines because they have no budget for food or vaccines for the dogs that they impound. So he goes there every week, and the staff is very happy to have his help. And with his help over the last few years, the euthanasia rate at this shelter has dropped from 80 to 20% because Tom has been so successful in getting these dogs ready for adoption. So he vaccinates dogs, as you can see here. He'll clip nails of this adorable little puppy. But Tom told me that the most important thing he does is to get the perfect picture of each one of these dogs. Just as we responded to that picture of Albie, when Tom goes and posts on social media the dogs that he's got at this shelter for adoption, that picture has to speak to someone making those decisions at a computer. Can we take this dog? Do we think we can place this dog? On this day, it was about 98 degrees, about 100% humidity. There are fire ants on the grass. He spent hours working like this. The guy in the orange pants lives next door to the shelter, and he volunteers there every day. He walks over, and he knew the temperament of every dog, which is really important because Tom's going to vaccinate them and clip nails. He's in his prison clothes because he lives in the county prison, which is next door to the shelter. A lot of the labor in southern shelters is provided by county prisoners. I had a lot of misconceptions about rescue and shelter dogs, and one of them, even when I started my research here, was that this problem of stray dogs was primarily a rural problem until I went to Houston. This is the consensus estimate of the number of stray dogs living on the streets of Houston, Texas. It's pretty staggering when you consider that Houston is one of the richest cities in the country. And I went out one evening with some volunteers from this group, the Forgotten Dogs of the Fifth Ward Project. And the Fifth Ward, if you've never been to Houston, it's the poorest, most crime-ridden, drug-infested community in Houston. You walk down the streets, it doesn't look like the trash has been picked up for months. So it's not just forgotten dogs living in the Fifth Ward, believe me, it's forgotten people too. And these folks go in there and they, what I call a street rescue, they will take dogs off the street that they think are really in distress and try and place them into a rescue. But mainly they're just trying to do what they can to improve the lives of the dogs on the street. So they're feeding, they're vaccinating. But to give you an idea of what it's like down there, I mean, I don't think you could imagine a scene like this at a CVS around here. Nobody batted an eye going in and out of CVS. This mama, they put out some food for her. When she'd had her fill, she took off across an undivided 6-lane road that ran next to this, and we all kind of held our breath, and cars were careening around, and some of them aren't so lucky. You know, a lot of them you see on the streets are injured, they're sick. But if they do take a dog off the street, that group, more often than not, it'll end up in the arms of Kathy Wetmore, who is a one-person operation in Houston. She runs Shaggy Dog Rescue. She will only send her dogs north with Greg. That's how much she believes in the way he does his work, which we're going to talk about. I wanted to follow the story of one dog that came into Kathy's rescue, and that's this guy, Noah. So Noah was living on a trash heap on the streets of Houston, and he had, as you can see, multiple medical problems when he came into Kathy's care. There are a lot of misconceptions, you know. People sometimes will say, well, why am I spending $400 or $500 in an adoption fee for a shelter dog? You know, they think they should be free. Almost always that rescue that's taken care of that dog and gotten it ready for your home has spent far more than they're ever going to recoup in their adoption fee. And Noah was an exceptional case because Kathy invested $10,000 in his veterinary care. The adoption fee was $200 for Noah. This is after he had gone through months of care. He still has those scars, but you can see he's a much happier dog than he was. So that's sort of the tough part of this story. So these dogs that end up on Greg's truck, these are the forgotten, the lost, the abused, the neglected, the real underdogs. They're just so lucky to get this freedom ride to the north. So now that the truck is going to turn north, the story is going to get more optimistic and happier. I mentioned earlier that Greg makes extensive use of Facebook. Everything Greg does in his operation is very intentional. He's given a lot of thought to what he does. One of the reasons he documents each of these trips on Facebook is for folks like us who are adopting, so we can follow the journey of our dog north. But as he said, I want that day to be so magical when you pick up that dog. I want the excitement to build all week long. Because he knows that, you know, as optimistic as you are, there are going to be tough days, right, you know, when you get a dog in your home, an adjustment period. And he wants you to remember always why you made this decision to begin with, what it was that motivated you to bring this dog into your home. So he's going to really build the excitement on Facebook all week, encouraging people to make their signs and to get ready. You know, I read you what he had written when he was with Albie. That's one audience, though. The other audience for these Facebook journeys are people like April here and Carrie and Kathy, who send these dogs north but probably will never get to see the gotcha day. Gotcha day is the day when the dogs come and meet their families. They may never see those moments they helped to create. So through Greg's Facebook posts, they can kind of participate vicariously in the success that they helped to create. So every dog that's getting on board, Greg's got that iPhone out, he's taking a picture. I should say that Greta Jones, who works with Carrie, also fosters a lot of dogs. Fosters play a critical role in this whole operation, because every dog that they can get off the streets or out of a shelter into a foster makes room for another dog in this on this sort of conveyor belt that never stops. Greg will say, and it's true, that as much as he's doing, and he's driven more than 30,000 dogs north, he says it's like emptying the beach one grain of sand at a time. Nobody I talk to who does this work down there thinks that they're solving the big problem. It's just about saving the next dog. So this was down on a rainy morning at Louisiana's. We were boarding the dogs, and this one's just there because he's so cute. And this is Noah, the dog that was on the scrap heap in Houston. And you think about how far this dog had to come, and that some stranger had to extend not only her wallet but her love to this dog to get him ready to get on Greg's truck. So this is in Katy, Texas, just as Noah's about to board the truck on his way home. At 3 stops along the way, Greg has what he calls his angels. These are grassroots groups of volunteers that have sprung up along his route. So, and right now, it's 6:30, Greg is just probably pulling into Birmingham right now, and there are about 20 to 30 volunteers with the Birmingham Angels who are there to meet the truck. It's a break for Greg. I mean, they've been walking dogs in the heat in Louisiana. They get to Birmingham. They have 30 people to help them get each dog out for an extended walk and hug them. And every time the dog gets hands put on, it's helping to socialize that dog. So it's a break for the dogs. It's uplifting, obviously, for the volunteers who come out to do it. And it's a huge help to Greg along the way. Tomorrow night, Greg will be in Allentown. This is the long night of the journey, by the way. So Greg has been since early this morning, Thursday morning, picking up dogs at stops across Louisiana. He's in Birmingham now, and in a couple of hours, they'll pull out of Birmingham, and he and the other driver will drive through the night, all the way into Virginia, up into Pennsylvania, until they arrive in Allentown at about 6 o'clock tomorrow night. I gotta tell you, when I was on the trip with Greg, I like to shower every day. And it was like Tuesday. I'm like, when can we shower? He said, oh, don't worry, you can shower on Friday when we're in Virginia. It's like 3 days away. You know, you're traveling with 80 dogs and you're sleeping in a trailer with 80 dogs. It's, shower's a nice thing. Earlier, I read you that post that he wrote when he crossed the Mason-Dixon line with Albie. Greg always stops and writes a Facebook post when he crosses the Mason-Dixon line. In part, it's the symbolic demarcation between South and North. But he'll tell you that the real reason is that once he's in Pennsylvania, he feels the weight of the world off his shoulders, because he knows that even if he has a breakdown or something happens to him, he's close enough that the dogs are going to get to where they're going. So, and this is, if you can read this is sort of how he's getting you excited. He says, all bad memories of being homeless, starved, abused, and abandoned, and unwanted and unloved are behind us. Our thoughts are on forever families and forever love. Are you excited? Is your sign ready? Get ready, we're almost there. Greg is the real deal. He is so committed to this. And sometimes there's a dog that needs a little bit of extra attention. One of the other big stressors for Greg, and this happened on my first full trip with him, is mechanical failure. And he's got a very old rig. And we had about 55 dogs, or 60 dogs still on board, and the truck couldn't get out of Danbury because of a brake line failure. I figured it was not a good time to ask Greg questions, so I took a dog for a walk, and you can just see the strain on his unshaven face with all these dogs in the back, 60 families waiting in Hartford and Putnam, Connecticut for these dogs. So the word goes out on Facebook and phone calls are made to let people know that he's running behind schedule. This is a very bare bones operation. Any penny above what he has to charge for these dogs went right down the tubes with a $500 brake line repair. Took a couple of hours. But the thing I really admired about Greg when I saw it was that at the next stop, when he bounds out of the truck and greets these people who are waiting, you'd never know. Whatever misfortune, whatever stress he's endured, he's not going to let it mar your big day. So Gotcha Day is the big payoff for all this hard work that Greg does. It's the day when, it's always a Saturday, when families meet at these designated spots to meet the dogs that they've been waiting for. And one of the reasons Greg is such a blessing to a writer, on my first trip with him, this is actually the one for Parade Magazine, we pulled into Putnam, Connecticut, and there were about 30 people waiting with their signs. The truck came to a stop, and you know how it sounds when a truck stops and the air escapes from the brake lines. And he just sighed, and there was like a long pause, and then he looked at me, and he just said, and this is exactly what he said, he said, a few days ago, these dogs were all going to die. He said, now the doors are going to open, the light's going to pour in, and each one of these dogs is going to be delivered into the arms of a loving family. This is heaven. That's exactly what he said to me. I'm like, oh my, I was like, you can't write it better than that. Very eloquent. So this is just, I'm going to show you another short video of what Gotcha Day sort of sounds like and feels like, and then comment on a couple of things that you'll see. So, you know, when Greg gets off the truck, he's not going to look like the pilot who flew you to London on Virgin Atlantic Airlines. He's going to look like he's been living with 80 dogs for a week. Dirty jeans and tattered cap. The picture, again, for Facebook, but now for everyone back down the line who helped that dog have that moment in their life. The other thing I saw him do, and again, he didn't tell me, I just sort of watched him do it. If a family's waiting for a dog and there's a child, you know, there's an envelope for each dog with all the medical records, the interstate travel certificate, all the paperwork they need. He'll almost always give it to the child and say, it's important when you bring your dog to the vet for the first time, you have to bring this with you. These are important papers. So he's communicating something important to those kids right there. This is a great day. You'll never forget it. It's also a responsibility. So I'm just going to show you, without comment, a few of these Gotcha Day pictures because they kind of speak for themselves. And this is Noah's big moment. This is just before the book came out. I didn't get to witness this firsthand, but as you watch this, think about this dog living on a scrap heap in Houston, enduring months of medical care just to get ready, and he's just about to meet the two women that are going to become his new family. I've been to a number of these. I'm telling you, if you can go to one of these and not cry, there's something wrong. You can follow Noah. By the way, Noah lives now with Andrea and Linda in Brooklyn. He's a hipster. And you can follow him on Noah the Shaggy Dog on Facebook. And he's got a adopted sibling dog, and he's just doing great. Anyone who has a dog, we all do this. We always look at our dogs and we project what we think they're thinking. And I don't know how accurate it is a lot of the time. But when I saw this next picture I'm going to show you, I was convinced this dog knew it was home. And you know, Greg says that on Friday nights, when the last night in the trailer, he said, I can feel the excitement coming off the dogs. He said, they don't have any idea what's going to happen tomorrow. He said, but I think they know something good is about to happen. And I mean, you know, you can see they're holding the paperwork with her picture on it, and just that sublime moment of, you know, of being unified. And this I just show because it's really my favorite picture of Greg. I really think it just tells you all you need to know about him and why anyone who has ever picked up a dog from him just loves this guy. So at the end of every trip, this is what he writes. He says, I'm 700 miles from a hot shower and a real bed to sleep in and loved ones that miss me. I'll see you on my next rescue road trip. My name is Greg, and I help save lives. Now, if you remember back to what I read you when he posted that picture of Albie, and he talked about them taking a walk and trying to calm him down, and having Albie calm Greg down, that is. And he said something about, we both have our happily ever afters waiting for us. I didn't know the full import of what he was writing until probably a couple of years later, when I found out that that was a Friday in early July of 2012 that he was driving Albie. So Saturday, Albie would have gone to the quarantine in Medfield, Mass. Greg would have turned the truck around after the drop-offs in New England, spent the night somewhere in Pennsylvania by the side of the road to drive home to Ohio on Sunday. Greg got home Sunday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and married Adela at 6 o'clock that afternoon. So when he was referring to his happily ever afters, that's what he was talking about. And to tell you the loyalty that he's engendered among these angels that meet him every other week, about a half a dozen of them had taken their cars and stationed themselves all across Pennsylvania in case he had a breakdown. They were going to scoop him up and get him to the church on time. And just a quick postscript. So this picture appeared on someone's Facebook page after the book came out. And I forget, maybe it was on Greg's page. I don't even remember where it was, but this was a dog named Cyrus who'd come north with Greg. Cyrus is still around. And so someone had posted this on Facebook. I thought it was so cute. And the next thing I knew, it kind of took off. And all these pictures. I mean, there are literally hundreds of these. But a couple I'll comment on if you can't read that in the bottom left. It says, tell me the story again about how you rescued me. And then I like the guy in the upper right because he's so bored he just fell asleep under the blanket. But of all the hundreds of these that exist, I'm going to show you my favorite. And then we'll... The thing that really strikes me about this picture is the absolute utter lack of remorse on this dog's face.
From Mary's Dogs, joined by Tony Lanzer, talking about volunteers. Bree and Lily Marston always with us, volunteering their time. We bring 60 dogs a month up on about 2.5 transports. We have 2 large transports and 1 smaller transport usually each month. And most of the dogs go to, all the dogs go to quarantine. Unfortunately, we no longer have that option of that gotcha day with the truck and meeting families because the state law in New Hampshire requires the dogs go to quarantine. We hold them for 72 hours rather than the 48. They're checked by our vet when they arrive, and then she comes back 3 or 4 days later and rechecks and does what she needs to do. I have a little crazy boy going on in here. And I wanted to tell you, this is one of my rescues. One thing that does happen so often in the South are these puppy mills that are happening all over. And about 2 years ago, we said yes to a group of little dogs that I really didn't know much about them. We just, as rescuers, you just say, okay, you have a reliable rescue and they're asking you to take a view of their dogs, and so we said yes. Well, who we ended up with were a group of dogs who were part of the puppy mill stuff that goes on there so routinely. And once the breeder dogs, once they're finished with them, they auction them off. They take them to an auction and they're sold for $5. And they never meet a good fate. Talking about the one in millions that made it was this one. Of course, he ended up staying with me because he was not socialized at all. He lived in a cage for 8 years, at least whatever his age was. So obviously never housebroken, never cared for medical needs, and quite shy with people. At this point in his life, he's doing fine, but he was one of those dogs that ended up in my care, and then after 6 months, it not being able to find him a home and realizing, oh, well, it's really not fair to continue to try because now he's settled in. And so he stayed. So talk about one in a million. This one got to stay with me, which is great. And he's Sebastian. This one, this guy came up. This is Tucker. Came up last Tuesday, I think. Part of a group from Arkansas. I think there were 6 of them that are a new rescue that we're working with, and adoptable. But really, Peter, what you're saying, the heart that goes into this and the amount of volunteers, it is 100 people. It's easily 100 people from the time the dogs are taken off the street, end up in a shelter, and people here don't often realize that, but what you said was so true. When people here are rescuing, they get to see the finished product, which I loathe that term, as you can imagine, but sometimes that's what we think they are, is a product, and they're not. They did have lives before. They do require a lot of time. When they're in a quarantine situation, it's extremely stressful. So they have 4 days in a quarantine facility with 29 others, you little rascal, you little rascal, barking and just doing all that these dogs do. High anxiety with the veterinarians coming in, new hands on them, and they do help socialize, but at the same time it's scary for them. And then they go into their new homes, and it's more anxiety oftentimes. So, you're a rascal, you are a rascal, you are a rascal. But it's the rescue process, it's what we do, and we just do it over and over. We have 17 people on our staff, and then at least 50 to 60 volunteers, I think, who are helping just on this end. We also maintain a great Facebook page. One of the reasons is that we want our Southern Rescues to see. We follow our dogs and track them forever, but really definitely the first year, so we can email back the pictures, or we always encourage our Facebook fan community to post on our Facebook so that our Southern Rescues are all watching. Where did that dog end up? Where did that dog end up? And it takes a village, and that's what to me what it has to be, and what I really wanted to do when I started my rescue was to create a community. So to me, it is a very large community of lovers of dogs. And some of the people that are in our community, in our Facebook community, are not necessarily our adopters, but they adopted somewhere. Or maybe they did purchase a breed, and that's just fine too. It's I don't even get into those kinds of situations, but lovers of dogs are lovers of dogs. And that's what we're always looking for. So. We are in Northwood, New Hampshire. We started out in about 5 years ago. We're in year 5, and we saw pretty quickly that we were going to need to have our own facility. Once New Hampshire came out with the quarantine law, we knew that our rescue was going to get too big, and we weren't going to be able to handle the numbers that we had. No veterinarians around here can support that many, so we started to look for a property. And it took us 2 years to find a property. We were under agreement 4 or 5 times, and every time it just wasn't the right place. And we ended up with an old vet hospital. So it worked out very well. It's a complete vet hospital. It was a rundown property, but it served our needs very well. And with the love and care and attention of our volunteers, we brought it up to a place that is. We call it a sanctuary. We want it to be a sanctuary for dogs and for people, and that's what we try to make it. And the dogs sometimes who come back to us, we greet them, we take them, we greet them as guests. They're guests of our inn. So that's what we do.
I'd like to add one little thing. Besides him, Mary, although she's very humble about all this, feels exactly like your friend Greg. But you have to add on this. Rescues will contact her 11 o'clock at night going, dog's gonna die tomorrow, love this dog, will you please save? And this happens a lot. So this is a 24-hour business.
Stop.
It never stops. And I have so much respect for all that everyone does with this, because if they didn't, it would be burnout time. I mean, this is very emotional business as well, as you know. But this little guy here is a real typical looking Southern pup.
We do know that we're just putting a Band-Aid on this. We know that this is not the ultimate answer to this. The ultimate answer is education, spay and neuter in the South. And really what we're hoping to do is to be a part of that solution as a rescue. One of the reasons that I wanted to have my own facility is so that we can do the numbers that we could do, and also so that we could begin to support a spay-neuter program in the South. Because truly, that's what has to happen. We have to get that. We have to get that in place, and that's going to be, over a period of time.
Just don't let him pee. What is he, about 5 months, 4 months?
14.
Yeah, he's a baby.
Yeah, he's a baby.
They usually come up around the 4-month point, or older.
Yeah. We do tend to take older puppies. A lot of rescues take their puppies at 8 and 10 weeks, but we do not. We begin to take them at 12 weeks after they've been fully vaccinated. We really want to It's stressful on our rescues because of course they have a steady influx. However, that said, if we can get them up here healthier, then our state veterinarian is much more pleased with rescues coming into the Northeast. And that is a consideration. If we bring young puppies up here and they pop with parvo because they're not adequately vaccinated, then that doesn't help the rescue process. So we've decided to bring them up at 12 and a half weeks. He isn't, is he?
Yeah, you did. You did.
Yeah, I mean, Greg won't take a dog that's not. I mean, it has to be fully vaccinated, minimum of 12 weeks old.
Oh, right.
Yeah, they won't get on board if not. So.
And that's, I think, what rescues are starting to do now is wait until they're a little bit older. They're fully vaccinated, and it's just much better chance that you're going to run into problems.
Yeah.
One more thing is a heartworm issue that I know that Greg must be dealing with. We are starting to see more of that here in New Hampshire as well.
See what?
Heartworm.
Heartworm.
Because there is not that. There's preventative is not in place for the most part in the South, and many shelters will adopt dogs out without being heartworm tested. So they're just perpetuating the issue down there.
Yeah, heartworm is very inexpensive to prevent, very expensive to treat, and difficult on the dog. And you know, a lot of people in the South, they just aren't doing the basic preventative, work they need to do to keep the dogs healthy. I mean, look, it's always possible. A dog can test heartworm negative and come up and you find that it's heartworm. I mean, there's no 100% guarantee. But if you work with a reputable rescue, you really, when you were out, he was asking me a question. I said, there are people who call themselves rescues who will drive down and throw a bunch of dogs in a car and come up and sell them, and that's not a rescue. So if you're thinking about it, ask around or go to these folks and work with a reputable rescue. Really important.
And there are some great rescues. There are some wonderful rescues right here who are following all those protocols and working closely with their folks in the South, and that really is the big thing. It's the making sure that you're staying in touch with your rescues and working with them, and that's what we've been doing. So
I should mention that a portion of the proceeds from the sale of the book is helping to support rescue road trips, and there are books in the back if you're so inclined. You're not obligated, obviously. So, but thank you guys for coming, and Tucker's available. Thank you.